Welcome to Three Witches and a Druid podcast, a Canadian podcast about paganism in today's modern society. Do not weep for me, for I have not gone. I am the wind that shakes the mighty oak. I am the gentle rain that falls upon your face. I am the spring flower that pushes through the dark earth. I am the chuckling laughter of the mountain stream. Do not weep for me, for I have not gone. I am the memory that dwells in the heart of those that knew me. I am the shadow that dances on the edge of your vision. I am the wild goose that flies south at autumn's call, and I shall return at summer's rising. I am the stag on the wind hill's way. I am just around the corner. Therefore the wise weep not, but rejoice at the transformation of my being.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Three Witches and a Druid. And our lovely guest is still with us this evening. So we're going to go around. I'm Margot.
And I'm Maeve.
Gwen.
Lawrence.
And I'm Brian. Yeah, so we haven't mentioned in 3 episodes that Lawrence, by the way, is dressed to the nines, while the other 4 of us are wearing shorts and t-shirts.
It's no surprise to those who know me that I always dress to the nines no matter the occasion. I do not own a single pair of sweatpants. It's something I have.
I agree. I am generally dressed to the nines.
Yes.
But
you have an excuse.
I have an excuse.
Now, I am guessing that you are your dress to the nines is very beautiful, that you were in a traditional wear.
You are.
I recognized
So I would have been
sash
great to discuss
right
it on the
away.
episode that it was probably for.
Yes.
Anyway,
Tell us about what you're
for those
wearing.
who have not been with us last 2 episodes, I am what I call a heritage witch. I focus on Acadian and French Canadian folk magic as my practice. And
That's a beautiful saying. Why did we say that?
heritage witch.
Heritage
Sorry.
witch. I like that.
All in
That's
about
not the
editing.
same as a fam trad. It's a heritage witch.
It's a
Isn't that
heritage witch.
interesting?
Much nicer.
Yes. So basically what I'm wearing today is an Acadian striped skirt that falls to the ankles, worn by many Acadian women back in the 1700s. But basically, most of this is a hodgepodge of what I currently own in my closet. I am working on a fully traditional Acadian costume to wear to rituals, to church, to just really fully get into it. So I'm currently working on a waistcoat, which is fun. And I'm currently wearing a ceinture fléchée, or a sash belt that voyagers would wear on their trips to the interior.
which I recognized immediately because I grew up in Manitoba.
Exactly.
Yes.
I happened to be born in Winnipeg, so I understand. Yes.
So yes, a lot of Voyager references and information there for sure.
Yeah. And on your head.
Yes,
a little scarf.
Yeah, it's a standard bandana, but I like to wear it as a form of veiling when I can. I wear it to church on Sundays in ritual. It keeps me in a headspace of this is separate from mundane life. This is holy. So anything that has to do with ritual, with spirituality, this podcast, of course, I'm wearing it. So
that's actually that's a good topic for someday, because into Druids we all wear our kilts and black pirate shirts.
And witches have their robes, but
Absolutely.
and when you first came in, and I have never met you before, I thought maybe you were a Mennonite, because I grew up in the country where there are many Mennonites, and they wear something very similar on the back of their head.
Yeah, and I only recently went back to church, right, as an adult of my own free will. And I saw some adults veiled, and I was like, oh, now that's a concept.
Well, it's true. I do know that even my mother was saying that when she was growing up, you would have never went in the church without something on your
Your
head.
head would be
Even
covered.
touring churches in Europe,
You should
We-
put a hat on.
well, now it's more the shoulders. Women, you would never go in with a sleeveless top or a tank
Right.
top. You would need to put something over your shoulders. The head, not as much, but we did occasionally get grief for not covering our heads. But we never went in any church with bare shoulders for sure.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm basically dressed like an Acadian peasant to the best of my interpretation. So that's what's going on.
But it looks fantastic, and it's colorful. It's beautiful.
Yeah, no, they didn't care what colors went with what. They worked with the fabric they had. It may look garish to our modern eyes, but I personally love their combinations.
You don't know me.
What is Maeve's favorite color?
Orange.
No!
Tie-dye.
Tie-dye!
I do have a little bit of tie-dye on my head. With a tie-dye on my head.
Well, so yes, I'm still here.
Yeah. So our topic for tonight, which is not this at all, is about the practice of pagan funerals, grief, death, and everything beyond. Dun dun dun.
Yes, I think as Westerners, and we've touched on this a little bit in the past, that we are very removed from death and from the practice of dealing with death, dealing with our loved ones, honoring our loved ones. I think it gets passed on to very often. The funeral is often performed by someone who never actually knew this person in real life.
Right.
Yes.
And I think and for someone who has experienced so much death in their life, I have been to alarmingly few funerals. Like, I think 4
Wow.
Wow.
in my whole life.
So I've been to more funerals than I'd like to count. So personally, I am definitely a patron of the Morrigan. Where the Morrigan comes into, for me, is that moving on to the next life. I am a very strong believer in reincarnation in my own belief, I guess. You can come back as anything. Depends on the life you've chosen to live and the life that you have been put here to live.
So the Hindu concept that you could come back as an animal or
Exactly,
something.
yeah.
Okay.
I also believe that we are placed on this earth to experience as much as possible with the goal of our soul to have experienced everything. And that's when you as a soul reach your form of nirvana or release, whatever it may be. I've mentioned this before, the Pixar movie Soul, pretty much that. Maybe less of the escalator, but
there was a point where I had a dreadful existential crisis with the idea of my soul wanting to experience all these different things. I could not bear the idea, and I suppose this is very egocentric, that I was just for my soul's amusement. And I had this dreadful existential crisis because of it. It was horrifying. It was awful.
So before 2018, I had attended various great-grandparents and grandparents' funerals, aunts, uncles, that sort of thing. And in 2018, my mother passed away. This was more of a shock, as my father was quite ill for the last 10 years. So everyone was surprised when my mom passed away before my dad passed away. So that sent me personally into an existential crisis spiral. There was a lot of thought of death, decay, your own personal mortality, everybody's mortality around it. And then I attended my mom's funeral and I got mad because my parents were never religious folks, but they grew up in PEI. And it didn't matter who you are, because in PEI, every funeral is the same. And this is not a slight in any way against the church. Every funeral is all about Jesus. Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. And I sat in that room and I heard my mother's name mentioned twice. And Jesus was mentioned 19 times.
I've been to funerals like that.
I'm so sorry.
It just made me think a lot about what was happening. That to me, the greatest woman I ever met passed away, and we weren't talking about her. We were talking about characters from the Bible, which isn't an issue, but that has a place and time, and this wasn't it. And so that's when I felt the Morrigan had placed her call on me. So I continued through my existential crisis for about a year. I had a hyper focus on my own mortality, my own death. It wasn't exactly pleasant. At no time would I say I felt like suicidal. I wouldn't. That wasn't the concern. It was just a major focus of my life, and it got in the way because I didn't feel I could really accomplish anything else. Then my father, who was quite sick, cancer didn't take him, old age didn't take him, a broken heart finally took him. So 9 months in 2019, my father passed away, and it stopped. The existential crisis came to an end. And it's because I realized I was angry again because I went to my dad's funeral. My dad was mentioned twice, and Jesus was mentioned 27 times. And once again, this is not a slight against the church, it was a slight against the system. And I realized that while, once again, one of the greatest people I ever knew in my life was now in the ground, no one was talking about him. They were talking about fictional characters from the Bible. And this drove me to a point that I feel one of my jobs in life, and something I need to start moving more forward on, is to become what's called a death doula. And my goal as a death doula is not to tell others how they should or should not feel. It's to help them get through those emotions, get through the rigmarole of red tape that our government has placed on death and funerals.
Unbelievable.
And make that process and make the understanding that that individual moving on to their next life is as easy as possible for the people left behind. I understand, and we've discussed this before, that funerals are not for the dead, they're for the living, they're for the people who are left behind. And I slightly disagree with that. I understand that the living are the ones that are to be here to experience it, but that experience should be up to the individual who has left us, and not up to the people left behind. So I often joke, when I pass away, it's going to be a show.
I want a luau.
Yeah, there's going to be a luau. And when you come up to the coffin, I'm going to come out of the coffin. It's going to be...
I want a luau.
And at the same time,
I
I don't want to be cremated. I don't want to be ground up. I want someone to toss me in a potato sack in the back of their car, drive me out to the green cemetery outside of Halifax, where they'll have a hole pre-dug, and someone just tosses me in, and then that's it.
Well, we know
That's. I was trying to remember. I saw something on Facebook, like a meme about green burials or something, and I can't remember what.
It's a tree planting. That's how we get haunted forests.
That's one, but there was another one. I want to be buried. The word wasn't raw. I want to be buried basically unwrapped, and I don't remember what the word was.
Yeah, I don't want any embalming fluid.
No, either. Absolutely.
Stick me in the ground. Because the body's dead. That doesn't matter. My soul is long moved on. Take me to a bar, drink a pint, and then stick me in the ground.
Weekend with Bernie.
Yeah, exactly. That would be the ultimate situation.
For many, many years, I had a horror of being buried, and I want cremation. And then it was when my mother-in-law died that we went into the room where the urns and the caskets were. I went with my husband to do that. I couldn't enter the room. I realized about 20 minutes later that it wasn't being buried, it was the coffin.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It's the coffin, and even putting me in an urn and sticking me in the ground, it's that, being
Confined space.
Confined.
Agreed.
And the thing is now that they have green burials, if I could just be put in the ground, with a sheet and some grave goods, with a tree, that's okay, because my neighbor said to me, well, you're so into the earth, and the nature and the this. I'm surprised you don't want to go back to the earth. And I said, it's not the earth, it's the coffin. I don't want to be, even an old pine box, I don't want to be put in a coffin.
That explains so much.
I'm focusing on the grave goods. What?
Yeah.
You have 5 things that you are buried with. What are they?
A tie-dye sarong. I don't know. I have to think about tie-dye sarong, maybe some shells, some of the ashes of my cat Genevieve. You know what I mean? Maybe a few other things, some grave goods. I don't know. What do you guys think my grave goods should be? What am I?
So I don't have a point because as a cat, I'm not going to have a use for any of that stuff. I'm going to come back as a cat. That cat to me is like that, break or retirement. Hence, where is he now?
Oh, really?
Yeah.
No, maybe my tent.
Yeah.
My tent. I don't know. I think about that. I don't know. Yeah.
It's a good idea. Yeah. No, I love the green burials are coming into actual existence.
Thank goodness.
Because, you awakened to something in me too. It was the coffin, right? I don't mind the earth. I love the earth, but don't put me in a coffin. Honestly, I think my ideal plan would be for me to be buried to make a tree grow, but also to have my ashes spread in the Laurentian mountains around the Saguenay region.
So, is there any way they could just take your heart out and cremate it, and then you could have a few ashes take place?
That would be nice. But I want to be spread out in the mountains surrounding my ancestors'
Yes.
origin place. I'd love to be within that land. So that's my dream for my plans.
I'm kind of torn because I would like to be cremated too, because there's going to be many places I know that I probably won't get to in my life, but I'd like my child to take some of my ashes there.
Sweet. That's fair.
That kind of idea too. I don't know.
While this is obviously an incredibly serious topic and it can be very emotional and deep for some people, for me personally, it's still a serious topic, but I think after my dad passed away, I came to acceptance of my own mortality. So
that was the same for me, because when my mom passed away, I stopped and thought, I think she was maybe 25 when I was born. So then I'm like, okay, I have 25 years left.
That's wild.
Yeah.
Must have hit hard.
And then I think about the past 25 years. That was not that fucking long ago.
No, we've had some fun though.
No, that's true. That is
serious
absolutely
fun.
true.
Yes, absolutely.
So, for me, I'm in no way suicidal. I don't think about that end date, but I'm perfectly okay when it comes, I guess.
Yes.
I've always kind of felt that too, because I think, after losing my maternal grandmother and my father and my little sister, at that point it's like, well, I don't know if I believe in a heaven or an afterlife or what, but yet I'm okay if I die because they will be there.
Yeah.
So
you have family to meet to right away.
Yeah.
And even walking through Camp Hill Cemetery on a regular basis, you look at the headstones from the Victorian era and they have descriptions of, unto this bosom I go to and I fly. And I'm like, no one has those sayings on their tombstones.
No.
How much of a comfort is it to be a part of a denomination that really truly honors what you believe in order to comfort you? And that's so invaluable as something when you die for your relatives. It was severely ingrained into their culture to the point where it was a great comfort to them. And now I look at modern headstones. It's so sanitized, in my opinion. And, they automatically just go to automatic atheist funeral service if they haven't detailed out their plans. And that makes me incredibly sad.
Yeah, grief has become, I find, in general, quite sanitized. How many, and sadly, I've known several people who've lost, a spouse in the past 2 years. I know a whole bunch of people who've lost their spouse, and after a month they're back to work.
I know it.
I feel
speak for themselves, not me.
But many of them were 2 weeks later. Off they went back to work. I know several people like that.
I think that's a societal thing.
It is.
There is an expectation. I was very grateful that both the prison and the hospital were very good about that. They allowed that space for me to come back in my own time.
Yes. But there are many cultures where you get a year to wear black and be as miserable as you want to be. I think that's a great thing. And one of my friends who lost her husband very suddenly, she's back to work a month later, and she's pushing on, and she was trudging on. The bottom fell out. About a year and 2 months later, the bottom fell out, and she was a mess. So I think,
I hate to say this, but maybe the Victorians were right.
About one or two things.
You start black for a year, then you gradually go to gray, and then lavender. And people know through an intricate language of clothing at what point of the grief process you're in. That is genius. I wish we still had that.
You don't have to say a thing. They can read it, and they can interact with you appropriately.
It was.
So that would be amazing.
I would love that, having the whole that long to be in mourning.
I have so many comments off of what Brian says, but I don't know if we want to go back there. So I was thinking about some of the things that you were saying, and we've kind of diverged. But I think one of the things for us as pagans is that orthopractic aspect of our religion about right action. And that many Christians' right belief is important. So that inclusion of theology and Jesus in that funeral service gives them comfort. If they have that whole theology, when we're such a pluralistic society, even if we have a funeral service and we have our faith community amongst us, the act of the funeral service, the theology doesn't matter. The theology, because every single person has a different relationship with deity, a different pantheon that they are comfortable with, or all those sorts of things. So maybe that gives them comfort, and there is an assumption in a primarily Christian country that you're going to be Christian if you're buying generic funeral service from your funeral home.
Yeah.
So as listeners know, my husband passed away several months ago, but due to COVID, his funeral services were delayed a couple of times, and we just recently had them. And at Brian and Maeve's advice, I did not officiate, which I often officiate, but I did not help officiate. And so my three co-hosts, we planned it together, and they were very gracious in letting me say, no, I like this, or no, I don't like that, or these are the things I want to include. But we were about being there to honor Dave.
Absolutely.
And whatever our individual versions of theology were. And Dave's version, while pagan in outlook and from his history, also a little bit of First Nations, although in outlook, it was all different anyway.
Yes.
What would we say? What would we say? We weren't there to convert people, and our versions of orthodoxy, our individual versions, would not offer comfort to anybody. To include community that showed up for Dave's funeral, it was about Dave.
Right.
It was about Dave, and it was beautiful. If I may say so, I'm going to just point people out. So poor Margot, they divided up the elements of the service, and it was very beautiful, and all of these sorts of things, and had these great plans. And Margot had this great idea for a circle opening, had her bionic knee surgery, had a little
hiccup,
and was in hospital with a broken arm during Dave's service. So it was,
I was miserable.
So we all phoned her afterwards, and we're trying to be supportive. And Maeve brought her some grief buffet. But
that's such a weird concept. Being in the hospital, miserable that you're not at the funeral. It's like compound grief.
I wanted to be there so badly. I don't want to say looking forward to it, but I was invested in it. It was important to me.
And that's a good point. Because you may be looking forward to it, because it wasn't a typical funeral.
Yeah,
It's
yes.
a celebration of life.
It was. So Margot was going to open the circle, and we adapted it and made it work. But Dave, as we've spoken before, was a master wand maker, and we asked people in the community that would be coming anyway to bring their wands, and they created the circle using Dave's wands. Maeve called all the quarters, and she took an element of Dave's passions and Dave's life. And when she spoke to air and when she spoke to each of the quarters, she made it individual to...
That came to me at 10:30 that morning.
Oh my goodness. It was the most beautiful thing.
Well, I had it all ready, and I was, how Dave was involved with each of the elements and related, but then I said, wait a minute. The air, we celebrated the friend he was. The fire, we celebrated the husband he was. The water, we celebrated, the father he was, and the earth, the grandfather he was.
Yeah.
And that came to me at 10:30 that morning.
So
it was very interesting.
So it was right action, and it was personal, and Brian welcomed people, and it was about Dave's lives and Dave's investment in the community and his family and in the creation of family around him, and those sorts of memories. A couple people spoke for a very, very short amount of time, but every aspect of that ritualistic process, Dave was the center of it. And I've had a lot of people have either reached out, or I've met in my, whether it was work friends or whatever, and they have said to me, that is the most beautiful funeral ceremony I've ever been. I've been to things that were close, but nothing that was as personal, but as beautiful as it was. And to be fair, I heard a lot of it afterwards because I thought I'd be okay, and I shook and kind of was in a fugue state for part of it when I've been coping pretty well. But I don't think that's unusual for a pagan funeral to be personal. I don't think it's unusual to be focused on the person and the relational aspects, because our religion is relational.
It was, absolutely. It was wonderful. And I was to another funeral once that was like that. And it was just everybody standing up telling hilarious stories about the guy as we drank. It was perfect.
It was like almost like a sample or whatever.
Yeah, it was perfect. And it was really nice. And I'm usually not too, I get psyched nervous before a ritual. But I was really nervous to do that because I was for Dave and I wanted you to be satisfied.
Well, that's
I was
what I've
super
always
nervous.
said before any ritual. I always get really nervous before ritual. Doesn't matter what, like I could be with a group I've been working with for 20 years. And I've realized the day I don't get nervous before ritual, I'm not doing it anymore.
Yeah.
Like that's how important it is to be. So I totally understand.
Yeah, I get psyched nervous, but I don't, on the whole. But it was really, and I thought, my goodness, it was 10:30 that morning. And it was like, wait a minute here. It was really good. And it was very personal, and people, your brother and your sister were singing.
Yeah, my brother and sister sang.
And people
my family
talking,
sang.
and the boys spoke. It was really nifty.
Yeah,
it was very
Sons did
nice.
his eulogy. So, that's how it was focused on him. And the eulogy was done, again, I think that's not unusual in a pagan ceremony, where the eulogy is done by somebody who actually knows you very well.
Yes.
And to be fair, modern Christianity isn't the Christianity of the past, where people were part of a community where the minister did have a personal relationship with you, the priest, and he would be able to have that personal touch.
I can talk about that for
hours.
Oh boy, because researching in French Canadian funeral culture is so much fun. Like someone passes away, they stop the clock as soon as the person died. That clock is covered in black, and it is not to be seen for an entire week, sometimes more, depending on how much time the person needs. And the whole family the women of the family prepare the body for viewing, but through their own house. They don't go to a funeral home.
Yes, that was what I said
People
when
visit all week.
we went to my mom's in the funeral home before she was cremated. I wanted to be able to be take part in the preparation of that.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's
Not
just
allowed.
not
No,
allowed.
it was such an intimate and personal
Yeah.
way of doing a funeral and doing good
Yeah.
by somebody who passed away. And the Day of the Dead was a sacred time for that specifically. You
Yes.
remembered the people you helped pass on. And you cared about the souls in purgatory because you know how hard that can be in the passage.
So part of the issue now
Yeah.
with our modern system is that everyone gets embalmed. Everyone
Exactly.
like, that wasn't the intention of those
No.
systems. Embalming was meant for individuals who had to
Travel.
travel
Exactly.
afterwards so
Yes.
they could get from point A to point
It's
B.
the whole sanitization and hygiene coming along and medicine and doctors, scientists just taking control a bit more. And they're like, we don't need midwives. We don't need women
Yeah.
attending bodies. We don't need any of that. We do this ourselves in a sanitized and very harsh environment.
Right.
And that completely destroyed the soul, I think, of the industry itself, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Of the
having,
practice.
I think having the body or whatever, ashes end up coming home. But I mean, there might be, maybe you would find more solace in being able to sit next to the coffin
Yeah.
all night instead of having to leave by
Yeah.
8:30.
Exactly. It's
You know what I
process of
mean?
grief.
To be with them, it's very sanitized. They want to. I guess it's all about calmness and perhaps dignity in some ways, but I find it's very, very sanitized.
Well, and it's also about turnover.
You want to believe it?
Mm-hmm.
What do you? Maybe you don't remember because I've seen the movie. I don't know 40 times. The old Christmas Carol movie
Oh,
with
yes,
Alistair Sim.
Yes, I.
And Scrooge goes up to say goodbye to Bob Marley. And there's an undertaker at the top of the stairs. And he says, well, you don't, basically let the grass grow under your feet. And he says, ours is a very competitive business.
Yeah.
The undertaker. And I mean, it's been, once that sort of started happening, it was a competitive business and an expensive business.
Yeah.
It's crazy. I find too, like going to the personal funeral and being asked to help with, with Dave's service and everything. It's like, I wanted to make it as personal as possible, but because the worst funeral I ever went to in my life was in the First Baptist Church. I think it might have been in Dartmouth. And it was my aunt's mother-in-law. And her mother-in-law was a lovely woman, kind. I mean, she was part of brought into the family, and just the nicest woman in the world. And I went in there, and it was, God is great, God is great, God is great, and now the horrible sinner is going home to Jesus.
Oh my God.
I couldn't believe it. I left there going, that was a horror. It was a horror.
It's
Yeah.
awful.
And another funeral I went to, sadly, a friend of mine, he passed away when he was only 41 from cancer. He left 4 children and a wife behind. And it was huge service, huge, because he was a wonderful, wonderful man. And he didn't know the minister in the church it was in. It was his mother's church or whatever. And the minister didn't even say his wife's name. His name was also Dave. Dave's wife and children. Didn't say the name of the children or the name. And this was, I don't know, 15 years ago?
Yeah.
Nuts.
Not even.
Not
Yeah.
even? I mean, he didn't know this guy. And afterwards, I said to his wife, I said to my friend, I said, what the heck was that? She says, that was for his mother. that had nothing to do with me.
Yeah.
Wow.
Believe it or not. She didn't even say her name.
Yeah.
His wife and children. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
It was in a Catholic church, and there was this very modern art Virgin Mary. And I finally tuned out and was looking at the Virgin Mary and talking to her in my mind, just like, because that, the Christian goddess, the Virgin Mary. And I said, I couldn't even listen. It was horrifying.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's why it's great. It's nice to have the personal. I hope someday I'll be able. Will any of you be alive still to do that? Who's going to do that for me?
Apparently,
Yes.
I'm a teenager according to you guys, so I'll be around.
Brian, you'll be doing my funeral because nobody else be doing it. I got no one to do it for me.
I was thinking your funeral should be up a mountain by a waterfall.
Yeah.
Yes, that would be nice.
Hike in. Yeah, hike in and hike in.
By a waterfall. Yes, indeed. There is a waterfall that I do. Part of the list of places, if I don't have green burial, is one of them is a waterfall near where I grew up. I'll put some in there. I'm also going to the Sphinx. I'm going to Llangollen in Wales. I'm going all kinds of great places.
So let's talk a little bit about the grief process. So we talked about sticking ourselves into the ground or what we want the ceremony to be. But if you lose someone, how is it that you deal with that? I guess in a pagan sense.
I was going to say badly. No, it is badly can't. No, I think I'm doing okay.
You're doing really well.
It's really hard because I hesitate that whole, like you say, how can you believe in past lives but not believe in reincarnation? But I know, like, sometimes I'll say these things and they'll come out of my mouth and I'll think, oh, you sound like such an idiot. But I am aware that Dave and I have been together before and we will be together again. And I will see him again in some form or another, the essence of him and the essence of me. And right now, I grieve my loss. I don't grieve him because I think from 2016 on, he had various forms of pain and disability and had for such a vital person. So, I grieve for my own loss, but I do have some sort of nebulous understanding that that's just, in the grand scheme of things, this is the blink of an eye.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things I sort of accepted after my mother passed away was don't grieve their loss. Celebrate the time you had with them. Celebrate that you got to know them. Yeah. Your paths got to cross.
Absolutely. As a young 27-year-old, I have not experienced much death at all in my life, so I can't even begin to fathom how someone goes through a grieving process of that kind, especially when someone close to you dies. I've never experienced that in my life.
I was pretty blessed with growing up with great-grandparents.
Same.
Yeah.
Same.
And I still have a grandmother, but I lost both my grandparents, my grandfather, the grandfather on the other side, and now both my parents and all of my aunts and uncles on my dad's side, except Uncle Donnie. Don't think I've lost Uncle Donnie.
I know. But I recognize two out of my two siblings, including myself.
Oh my God, Uncle Kent, he's still alive too.
I feel like I'm the more spiritual of the bunch.
Yeah.
Like I feel like I would have a foundation of belief to get me through the process, which is good. And my parents entrust me enough to tell me, you're in charge of the funeral when we die. And I'm like, okay.
Now, I didn't actually have to do much of this arrangement because luckily I have a sister who is in PEI and she dealt with the majority of that itself. Yeah, so I don't have a lot of experience on that end, but it's something weirdly enough to say, like, I'd like to find a way to get experience in that way. But please don't die, anyone I know, for me to get that experience.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm the same. When my mom died, my brother and sister-in-law, who had been looking after her and taking care of her and really hadn't, I don't think I had realized just how ill she was.
Right.
So they took care of everything. But she went to a small church, United Church in Cornwall. So she knew the minister very well. She was very involved in the church. She was very involved with the parish. So it was a very personal ceremony for her funeral, which made it that much easier to attend, knowing that it wasn't, like with Rhonda's dad, some person up there who'd never met him before and mentioned his name a couple of times in the funeral kind of thing.
Yeah. I think in a way it highlights our lack of community or our disconnectedness within this culture that so many people, and as pagans, these grassroots groups, very often, maybe it's a little easier, but then we need those death doulas like what Brian's looking at to navigate some of the complexities of how to make it happen. You may want these things, but it's beyond you, and a death out of nowhere makes it very hard
difficult to even decide which way to turn.
So you just go to a funeral home and get generic
Now,
package A.
If you don't mind me asking, and you certainly don't have to answer, the week before Dave's funeral, I was at another funeral. One of my oldest girlfriend's mother died, and I've known the woman since I was a child. And they waited a couple months until they had the service, and you waited quite a few months. Did you find that made it easier
I really don't know.
You don't know because sometimes
don't know.
It's like, especially with a sudden death, within 4 days their funeral's there and the family's so overwhelmed and
everything's. I think we had a chance to plan the funeral that we wanted for Dave, which was beautiful, which might have been a lot harder to do under a strict, that 1 week.
Yes.
You have a couple of visitations, whether it's in a private residence or whatever, and then you have a funeral, and then people go on about their business. And that's sort of the way the funeral business works now. Because of COVID and the restrictions on people gathering indoors and that sort of thing, there's been a lot of delayed funerals. I've been hearing stories as well. People have been offering their stories up. I thought it was doing really well. It kind of triggered some stuff, but maybe it was some stuff that needed to come up anyway, like these are things that are just going to come up. I was sitting there and I was like, my leg is shaking. Oh my goodness. But people like 3 rows back said, no, your leg wasn't shaking. Your whole body was shaking. And apparently I was sitting in the chair just shaking.
Yeah, I did notice your boys with their arms around you. Yeah.
I thought my leg was shaking, but my whole body was shaking. But I found it brought things, it made them immediate again. That's one of the hardest things for me, grief process, pagan, non-pagan, whatever. It seems like I'm the only one who wants to talk about Dave. People are nervous to talk about the dead.
Right.
And I just want to hear his, I want to know he's not forgotten. I want to hear his voice I want to hear his name.
Within my family.
Yeah. Yes,
my
when
mom
your family passed.
did realize, and I mean, we were adults by the time she realized that she thought she was protecting our fragility by not talking about my father and my sister, whereas we would have kept their memories alive much stronger. Like, I no longer have a solid memory of my father's face.
Yeah.
The only memories of his face I have is from photographs and movies.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think perhaps if we had talked about them more and celebrated their lives more, I would have stronger memories, I think.
So I think that's definitely an issue in our culture.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because other cultures, they celebrate the dead.
Yeah.
There's entire days dedicated. Mexico, Day of the Dead. In Asia, you have shrines and temples dedicated to the ones who've passed on. I think the Mexican Day of the Dead is one of the most beautiful celebrations that we have in our world.
Yeah, I might not ever want kids, but I still want my household to be raised in that kind of energy.
Right.
Yeah.
Nothing's taboo. Everything on the table. You are allowed to talk about things like that.
Well, I was nervous at first, and I asked you.
Yes.
I asked you. I said, "Where's the line here? Is it okay if I talk about Dave? Would you prefer I didn't?" I thought, I don't know what I'm supposed to, where the line is. And
for
I
sure.
asked.
And we don't have modeling on that, really, do we? And
That's just
we
'cause
don't
I'm
know
pushy.
how to. But I know, and you did the right thing to ask. I think for most people, they would appreciate the ask. But I know for my own sake, and I remember the week after Dave passed away, the boys stayed with me. We had realized he was quite sick. Dave hadn't realized, but we had realized. And my sister said, call the boys.
Hold up. It's not that Dave didn't realize. Dave was stubborn.
Yes, Dave was stubborn. Dave was stubborn. He was proud of being stubborn.
Wait a minute, didn't one of the boys say, was the word intractable? How's that word?
Intractable, maybe?
Intractable, that's it, yes.
So apparently his eulogy wasn't, when you die, we don't forget all the characteristics, your characteristics. It's an accurate picture, possibly. It's a loving but accurate picture. So they stayed, and when my oldest went back to work, some people said, "Oh, we're glad to see you back, and sorry about your dad." And there was a couple of people that he was quite close to at work, and he started to talk, and he basically got shut down. He said, people don't know how to talk about people who have gone. And he said, I just wanted to talk about my dad.
Yeah. I will forever remember as I'm calling the north and I was using the drum.
Yes.
Was it or was it when we were doing the drumming for the rocks? I forget what it was. Which one it was?
I think
No,
it was
it's at the beginning.
Yeah, it was the round soft part on the end of the beater stick flew off.
Yeah,
in the
had
middle
to
of the
be.
ceremony. And I did say straight out, I said, that is Dave putting me right on the spot.
Oh, yeah.
Because
yeah,
I
he
could
would
also
enjoy
hear him
that.
saying, aren't you supposed to be drumming? Why aren't you drumming? I thought you were drumming. He was putting me right on the spot having that thing fly off. I know it was him. So I'll remember that forever. That's a funny story.
But you're right. A lot of people find it very uncomfortable to talk about the dead who they don't have a connection to. But at the same time, I feel it's really important to learn those stories, to learn about those individuals, to learn about those people. So I mentioned sort of off recording, here in Halifax, we have a social media account called Dead in Halifax. It's an individual, Craig Ferguson, goes around Halifax and he finds older tombstones or memorials, and he does the research on the individual, and then he'll create online social media posts about them, and I think it's beautiful.
Yeah,
That's a
I
marvelous
agree.
thing. Or the
Yeah, I
fellow
agree.
who's cleaning up the old cemeteries and abandoned cemeteries in
Absolutely.
Nova Scotia. And as I said earlier to everyone here, I had to get off that Facebook page. I was so upset all the time because some of these, like I say, the gravestones, no one's been there in 100 years.
But to have that, and then they're on Facebook and viewed so many times.
That's nice.
That's
but I
beautiful.
couldn't watch it. I couldn't see it anymore. I was crying. I'm like, and I can't watch it.
So I love that concept in Mexican culture. And what was the movie? Was it Boca de
Coco?
Yeah, Coco, yeah.
Oh, that's a marvelous
Yeah,
movie.
where
Maybe
like
some-
they sort of gain the power and fame in the afterlife based on who remembers them.
That is
And we've
interesting.
had some amazing Samhain
Yes.
feasts
Yes.
honoring our
Absolutely.
ancestors
Yes,
as well, with
Yeah.
Like so,
all their favorite foods. And
Now, I'm very fortunate. My parents are still with me. My grandparents have passed on. I was very close to them, but my one grandfather especially is with me often. That's another thing some people don't ignore. You know, I had a neighbor who, after her grandmother died, I was so scared. She was so upset because the TV had flicked and the light had flicked and whatever. And it might be my grandmother's ghost, and she's all upset. And I'm like, well, were you afraid of your grandmother in life? Oh no, my grandmother was wonderful. I said, well, why on earth are you afraid of her now?
Yes, exactly.
There's no reason. My grandfather and my one grandmother are popping by all the time. One of them usually to go, excuse me, what are you doing? But the other one is with me all the time. My house and my daughter's one grandmother on her father's side was in the house all the time. It's like, they're still there.
Yeah.
You know, and I mean, people, that's another thing. Is like, do they still talk to, if they talked to them or had them around or, you know, knew they were there? I can tell when they're in the house. It's like, oh, well, this is really nice. And it's comforting.
It is.
It's very comforting to know that they could be there and you could speak to them, or they could give you words of advice or comfort. It's very, very nice. So people shouldn't ignore that. And a lot of people, oh, there's no such thing as ghosts. It's like, oh, yes, there is.
You know, I wholeheartedly believe in ghosts. I truly do. Because my mother was incredibly close to her dad. So when he passed away in 2000 from lung cancer, my big brother at the time, he was maybe like 16. And one time she woke up in a sweat in the middle of the night. And she could have sworn she heard her father say, Guillaume has been in an accident. It's major, but he's safe. Sure enough, she got a call from the police saying Guillaume's been in an accident. You should come down and see. She'll never forget that instance because she knew like her dad was there watching over them.
Yes.
All the time.
Absolutely.
And you can
Always
really
there.
feel it. And every time too, my mom just looks at me like go in a coloring book and just draw or sew something or do anything really. She's like, that's my great grandmother. Like she used to do that all the time. Like spirit lives in you. And I'm like, oh, my mom's coming.
I plan to come back as one of my daughter's grandkids. That's my plan. That's my plan.
Daughter's grandkids, not your daughter's kid.
Well, I would like to be alive for their life.
That's true. That's true.
I'd like to be alive.
But you're supposed to enjoy grandkids.
That's right. I don't want to be dead within the next 10 years.
I just assumed you wanted to torment your child.
Well, I'm going to torment someone. I'm going to be tormenting some. No, when my daughter's grandchild is acting a certain way, she's going to go, that is my mother. You're just like your great-grandma.
My favorite death joke for me of all time is me dying, putting on a corset, must fit in with all the other ghosts. I feel that.
Yeah. Remembering is so nice. I remember when COVID started, and it was going on for a couple months, and it was just, and I remember thinking, oh, I wish my grandmother was here.
Yes.
Because she had been a British war bride. She had lived in England during the Depression and the war and the Blitz. And then, even afterwards, most people didn't have a lot of money after the war. And all of this is like, man, wouldn't it be nice to be able to have her advice?
Mm-hmm.
I could have her advice. If I can't see the dead, but if I was quiet enough, it would come to me. Her advice would come to me. So they're still there. They're still there. I like to think of them as still there because I am, knock on wood, very fortunate that my parents are still with me.
Me as well.
My parents are still with me. There we are. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in. And remember, your loved ones are still with you. Just sit quiet and you'll hear them. If you have any questions or comments or suggestions for our show, we certainly would love to hear from you. You can get a hold of us on our Facebook page or apparently Instagram. We have Instagram.
We have Instagram.
We have Instagram. And certainly thank you to our wonderful editor and our Patreons.
Three Witches and a Druid podcast would like to take a moment to thank our amazing Patreon supporters. Today, we shout out to Danny, Tania, Sarah, Laure, Kay, Linda, Jennifer, Highland Horde, and Larry. Without your generous support and contributions, we couldn't bring you this magical content, and we thank you for listening.
Until next time, everyone, merry meet.
Merry
part.
And merry meet again.
Blessed be.
This has been Three Witches and a Druid podcast. Thanks for listening.